The most conscious people aren't leading society forward. They're disappearing. And Carl Jung warned us this would happen. Look closer. You'll see it. The friend who suddenly deletes every account without explanation. The colleague who quietly resigns from a career they once chased like oxygen. The neighbor who stops showing up at every social event. Not bitter, not dramatic, just gone. To most, it looks like failure or collapse. Jung knew better. He called it a necessary withdrawal. Here's why. Society runs on unconscious participation. Shared delusions, mass projections, shadows everyone agrees to ignore. It only works if no one wakes up. But when you do, when you actually see the machinery, you can't unsee it. Conversations start to feel like theater. Work becomes unbearable play acting. Every interaction asks you to shrink just to keep the peace. And here's the twist no one talks about. This isn't discomfort you can push through with willpower. It's somatic. Your body feels the weight of pretending. Your nervous system rebels. Jung discovered that when consciousness expands, remaining in collective unconsciousness is like forcing yourself to breathe underwater. You can fake it for a while, but eventually, survival kicks in. That's why people vanish. Not from arrogance, from preservation, because staying means betraying what they've become. And every day you act smaller than your truth, you drain life itself. So why does it feel unbearable? Why does every interaction leave you exhausted? In the next section, we'll explore what Jung called the burden of seeing, and why once you glimpse the collective shadow, participation becomes impossible. Jung called it the burden of seeing. Once your awareness sharpens, you no longer just hear words. You sense the projections behind them. You notice the shadows people are running from. You recognize the hidden games that hold conversations together. It's like waking up in a room where everyone else is still asleep, talking in dreams. At first, you try to play along. You nod when expected. You laugh at the jokes. You translate your depth into surface language, hoping to still belong. But here's the cost. Every interaction becomes exhausting. Because you're not just carrying your own awareness, you're holding the weight of everything unspoken in the room. Jung warned, this isn't arrogance, it's survival. Consciousness in an unconscious environment burns energy like fire in a vacuum. You can only sustain it for so long before collapse. That's why the most awake people don't explode outward. They quietly fold inward. They retreat, not to escape the world, but to stop betraying what they know. Think of social media. To most, it's entertainment. To the awakened, it's a 24/7 projection machine. Every scroll reveals shadows being hurled across a digital battlefield. To stay there is to be battered by unconsciousness day after day. Jung himself described it as unbearable, like drowning in noise only you can hear, so the withdrawal begins. First the feeds, then the roles, then the relationships built on masks. Each step feels like disappearing, but in truth, it's a return to authenticity. But what happens when you go deeper? When solitude becomes the only place you can breathe? That's where Jung uncovered the next stage, the unavoidable hermit phase. And that's what we'll explore next. Withdrawal doesn't end with deleting apps or quitting jobs. Jung saw it progress into something deeper, the hermit phase. This is where solitude stops being a preference and becomes a necessity. When you reach this stage, crowds feel suffocating. Not because you dislike people, but because you sense the storm of unconscious projections swirling around them. Every glance, every word carries shadow material. To the unawakened, it's invisible. To you, it's deafening. Being surrounded feels like psychological violence. Here's the twist. Solitude isn't running away. It's preparation. Jung retreated to his stone tower by the lake for years, not to escape, but to integrate. In that silence, he pieced together insights that would later shape modern psychology. Without withdrawal, none of it would have survived. And this is what's happening now. People leave boardrooms for cabins. They walk away from circles that demand masks and choose small communities where authenticity can breathe. Outsiders see weakness. In reality, it's conservation. Consciousness is finite, and wasting it on unconscious interactions is like pouring water into sand. Have you ever noticed how after time alone, real solitude, no noise, no performance, you feel stronger? That's not loneliness. That's integration. The psyche is stitching itself back together. Jung said the hermit phase is archetypal. Every individuating person must face it. It's not permanent, but it is unavoidable. And here's the question. If this withdrawal is necessary, then what happens next? Do the awakened vanish forever? Or is there a return? Jung believed there is, and it changes everything. The hermit phase feels like disappearance, but Jung was clear. It isn't the end of the journey. Withdrawal isn't permanent. It's the cocoon stage of transformation, and what comes next is the return. But here's the catch. The return doesn't look like rejoining normal society. Once you've individuated, you can't unsee. You can't go back to unconscious games without tearing yourself apart. Instead, the return happens at the edges, in places where consciousness can exist without compromise. Jung called these people border dwellers. They come back, but differently. They don't lead mass movements. They guide small circles. They don't shout over the noise. They speak to those who are ready to listen. Some re-emerge as artists, channeling depth into creation. Others as healers, working with individuals crossing the same threshold. Others as teachers, building maps for the next wave of seekers. And here's the paradox. To mainstream society, they remain invisible. But to the few who are awakening, they become lifelines. One therapist Jung worked with disappeared for years, only to return with a new way of guiding people through spiritual emergency. Her work was almost invisible to the world, but profound to those who found her. Ask yourself, have you ever met someone who seemed almost hidden, yet every word they spoke carried weight? That's the return in action. Not loud, not dramatic, but unmistakably transformative. So the question becomes, if the awakened don't vanish forever, if they return with gifts, what are those gifts? And why does the collective need them now more than ever? That's where Jung's final insight comes in. Jung's final insight flips the entire story. The disappearance of awakened people isn't abandonment, it's architecture. They aren't leaving society to escape responsibility. They're building something the collective doesn't yet understand. Every wave of awakening begins with pioneers who step away first. They disappear not to hide, but to create space. Space where depth is possible. Space where authenticity doesn't have to shrink. Space where the next generation of seekers can land when the old structures collapse. Jung compared it to evolution. Not everyone awakens at once. The first to see further step out, adapt, and construct the edges of a new world. To the mainstream, it looks like retreat. In truth, it's forward movement. What society mislabels as failure is actually the groundwork for its future survival. And this is why Jung saw the hermit phase as essential. Withdrawal isn't selfish, it's service in disguise. The gifts the awakened bring back, clarity, authenticity, vision, can only be forged in solitude. They can't be developed while drowning in collective unconsciousness. Think about it. The collective doesn't need more people repeating surface opinions. It needs individuals who've gone so deep They can hold new possibilities. The ones who disappeared, integrated, and returned with something real. If the awakened are already disappearing now, quietly building in the margins, what exactly are they preparing? What kind of world are they shaping while the rest of society stays asleep? That's the story Jung never finished, and it's the one we're living through right now.